Our second reading this morning is from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verses 15 through 20. Moses said, "The Holy One, your God, will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. To that prophet you must listen. It was this that you asked of the Holy One, your God, at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, 'Let us not hear again the voice of the Holy One, our God, nor see this great fire again, or we will die.' And the Holy One said to me, 'This is well said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their people, into whose mouth I will put my words, and that person will tell them all that I command. If any person will not listen to the words which my prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call that person to answer for this. But if a prophet presumes to speak in my name a message that I have not commanded to be spoken, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet will die.'"
Preaching is dangerous business. There's a story told among my family at times of a woman who took matters into her own hands about what she perceived as bad preaching in worship. The story goes something like this. I stood up straight, and I walked up front as if it was an altar call, but I kept going. I went up the steps and right up to the pulpit, and I hit the pastor over the head with my umbrella. I couldn't listen to it anymore. Get no ideas. The worst to happen to me is, as a student minister internship, I preached a sermon one Sunday morning, and one of the pillars of the church, as she was walking out, shook her cane at me and said, "If I hear that one more time, I'm just going to get up and walk out of church." Being young, I responded, "Well, I expect this will happen soon." You learn lessons with life. But preaching is dangerous business. If you hear the words of Moses, that if you are preaching the wrong story, surely you'll die. Thank goodness we're not literalists. But the thing is, who speaks for God? Some say, "I get paid to speak for God." Some says, many of you get paid or have gotten paid to speak for God. But honestly, it's just not my business. It's all of our business. For if we listen to the news, if we listen to various voices, there are folks who believe they have been inspired by God to preach what we would call hate. That this is God moving among them, and they know for sure that this is what God has said, and they use the Bible to make their point, to proof text, not to read it all. There are those who feel that their notion of violence in war is sanctioned by God, and that there is no way they could be wrong. It's not that easy, my friends. That's why I think it's important for us to imagine what God does sound like when God speaks. But this we should know, that God speaks through you and me. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's public, sometimes it's in our daily work that we do silently. For almost 20 years now, in the United Church of Christ, we have spoken of a still speaking God. When we first started the Still Speaking campaign, which is now somewhat has phased out, the United Church of Christ released commercials. I doubt if any of you saw them, unless you saw them at church. So you've seen them. But the thing is, none of the major networks dared air these commercials, for they thought that they were pushing the envelope too much. Honestly, well, you can tell I'm United Church of Christ, I thought they were perfect. In one commercial, there's that of bouncers outside the church door, deciding who gets in and who gets out. There's another of the ejector seat, that while sitting in worship, they just spring out of the building. The thing is, in the United Church of Christ and among people like us and people around the world, we don't believe in a God that pushes buttons to eject us out of church, to have bouncers outside the door saying, no, you can't come in. We have been a church who has felt God speaking in many ways. We were, our predecessors, before the United Church of Christ existed, ordained the first African American minister in the United States. We were the first to ordain a woman from Henrietta, New York. We were the first to ordain an openly gay man in the 1970s. We have been the first at many things. As I told the Discover More last week, now our first is that we, as I would say, finally have a woman general minister and president of our denomination, who's a Jamaican American. We are a community of first. Not that we do it to show that we are good and proud and that this is what God looks like. We do it because we feel God speaking in our lives. In the months ahead, you, as a congregation, as you're already doing, and eventually a search committee, will listen to the Spirit of God speaking, of whom God will call to be among you. Will that new person preach the gospel from his wheelchair? Will that new woman, your pastor, be an African American? Will they wear hearing aids or not be able to hear at all? Some would say that's not the usual minister. Because some would think back in some church denominations that it's always a stately man at the pulpit. But the thing is, God speaks in so many ways. And as one commentator pointed out this week, as in some of my reading, is that when they were commenting about the demons coming out of these people, those unclean spirits, sort of changed the trajectory a little. What if the reading said, these unusual spirits? And spirits not necessarily having to be known as unclean, but unusual. What if the next person you call is unusual? Could be a good thing. New characteristics, new things, new point of view. But the thing is, they can't speak for God any more than you and I can. It is in community that we often hear the voice of God. It is what you are called to be about now, is to hear the voice of God as you think together with the transition team, hearing what God may be calling. Of course, we don't have a photo image to put up on the screen for you. We may imagine what we want, what he, she, or they may look like, but I encourage you to let God continue speaking and pray that God brings to you the unusual spirit of discernment. Amen.